Take it away, Staffan.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me here, letting me talk. I guess I'm the second example today of senior researchers gaming the system so we can go to conferences. Because this isn't my work. This is my PhD student, Christina Knaving. She couldn't come because she's working very hard on unlocking the achievement having given birth, which she will do in 2 weeks. So I get to go instead. So this is basically observations she's done regarding how you can think about gamification based on the definitions and theories and models and so on of games and fun and play. So it's a purely theoretical one, so we lost the empirical things, unfortunately. So this is a simplified reason why we're doing gamification. The user is unhappy. The user is doing some activity he or she doesn't want. Let's add gamification and the user will be happy. Very simple reason for doing this. Why does gamification work? Well, if you look at games, there are several different models of what makes us like games. Self-determination theory could be used and so on. Flow theory by Csikszentmihalyi is another one you can use. I'm not going to go through all of these parts, but you probably know most of these. There are goals, you get feedback quickly, you notice your own competence level, and so on. Csikszentmihalyi uses the word autotelic to describe this. So it's its own purpose, which we could use as a synonym for intrinsic motivation, right? So people play games because they like playing games. That's the main reason, right? But there's other types of motivations, and these are PR photos of me for one of the places I work. And you could say games, intrinsic motivation. I'm doing this because I like it. I'm sitting studying the dice because I like it. It's its own purpose. But then sometimes others come and want you to do things, and they might offer you something like dice here. Look, they're really fun, do something with them. But it's quite easy to get the feeling that this is a creepy guy doing this, right? You don't really trust him, you don't really want to do it. Yes, I don't like that picture of myself, but I found a good use for it, so why not? But what are we doing when we're doing gamification? We're adding a game to another activity. Okay, doesn't that mean that we're adding extrinsic motivation to the activity? A game itself might be intrinsically motivating, but if we're adding it to another activity, then it's not the same thing. So here's the first challenge, maybe, when doing gamification, which Christina observed. And that's that you still have to focus on the main activity. You can't forget about that. If the gamification part seems added on, it's intrinsic motivation, which might be a problem. A second point might be that actually some people like the regular activity, so they have intrinsic motivation, which the first talker talked about. So you might not want to do it. And from this you can get some other guidelines. Okay, make it voluntary to do this, or hide it actually, so you don't need to figure. Some people might react badly simply because they notice that it is some game, or that they're being gamed. Yeah, and don't force people to go in if they don't want to, if it's voluntary. So if you do gamifications, you should really think about, okay, how can you make the activities they're doing anyway be more meaningful? In another way, it might be seen that if you're doing gamification, maybe you should see yourself as rearranging the activity a bit, not fixing it afterwards. Or as people in an interaction design say, well, you should be part of designing the activity from the very start. You shouldn't come in the end when there's a problem and try to fix it. That's a problem interaction designers have worked with for a long time. Second challenge, well, if you do gamification, you're basically looking at some aspects of the activity, probably the ones which you can actually measure, and you're building this into a system. This system can be seen as a representation of the actual activity, but it's a simplified system. So it isn't the whole system, it isn't the truth. But people might start to mistake it for the main activity. They might start to be more interested in this. I'll give one example, an anecdote, which Christine and I learned from a friend of hers. A company which are working with buses put in sensors, and it rewards their drivers based on how they drive. They should drive ecologically. They shouldn't brake as much. They introduced this system. After a couple of weeks of testing it, yes, the drivers didn't brake that much. They didn't have any accidents, but they did have to replace the tires quite often. Because what they noticed was that the bus drivers realized they could brake by running the tires into the sidewalk. This is braking without using the brakes. And they were gaming the system here, because that part became too important. They weren't supposed to drive safely anymore in their perception in some way. They were trying to get this good score in their system. The third observation, which is really a possibility rather than a challenge, which Christine observed, is based on her view of games, what games are, which I think is really interesting. And she thinks that play is the really important part of games. We had play before we had games. To her, games is a way of being able to reproduce play. We started having rules so we can explain it to somebody else to kind of get the same experience we had while we were playing. So it's a way of reproducing play. However, there's a problem with this. People might actually start to game the games instead. And there's some correlation, I guess, with the zero-sum games and the positive-sum games here you could see. You can also see there's free play and play. So actually, if you're doing gamification, you might think, okay, what is it actually we want to encourage in the users? Is it that they're gaming something, gaming the system or not? That can be seen as bad very often, but not always. Or is it more that they should be playful? So Sebastian Detterding has been talking about playfulness, playful design. That's something you could think about doing also. But even if you're doing this and you're using gamification methods, you can fail because people start treating it as a game rather than a play. So that's tying back a bit into your last comments in the keynote, Amy. The part there about being inspired by children's play, yes, but it might actually be that you want to promote that playfulness also in the activity. And that's perfect timing. Thank you for that. So yes, thank you for that, and you can get some achievements by asking questions. Thank you.